Welcome to today's discussion, and it very much is a conversation / discussion and not so much a presentation. I am Patrick Williams with Urban Engineers, and we're proud to sponsor this very important topic. I've worked for the same firm located here in Irving, Texas for 20 or so years. And whether it's planning, engineering, construction management, or inspection, CSPP, safety, the proper phasing and implementation is so important in doing such work on an active airfield. It is very much life or death sometimes. So this topic was a no-brainer as to what to bring to you all for a discussion. Now, I mentioned discussion a couple of times because we would love for it to be free form. We have some prepared questions, prepared answers for the panelists that I'll introduce. I'll allow them to introduce themselves in just 1 second. But as we go through after the introductions, please start even right now populating the chat with some questions that we can pivot and respond to. We have our questions, but we are very in tune and want to know what needs clarification right out of the gate, what you as the audience would like to tackle right from the get-go. So without further ado, I'll start us off with intros of our panelists. Roman, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. For those of you that know me, those of you that don't, I am Roman Pinon. I am the lead civil engineer for the Texas ADO. My background is pretty extensive. I'm going on 21 years of FAA Airports Division experience. I started off in the Denver ADO, being the Utah and Wyoming state engineer, and then moving on to the Seattle ADO, where I became the Washington state engineer and compliance specialist up there for about 3 years. And then eventually moved back down to Texas, worked in Arkansas, Oklahoma for about six months, and then moved over to the 610 branch as the lead planner for the region, to where it leads me now to my current position. So a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, whether good or bad, but there's a lot of information possessed here. So concurrently, I'm also a Navy Civil Engineering Corps officer, Lieutenant Commander. Right now, I'm currently serving with 3rd Fleet. So I do a lot of military logistics, expeditionary planning with 3rd Fleet. So dual-hatted, so a lot of free time on my hand, as you can see. But I'm looking forward to this conversation and hopefully some good questions to be able to answer for all of you all, and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much. Paul, would you like to go next?
Yes, Paul Slesser. I'm with Texas Department of Transportation Aviation Division. I've been with the division about 13 years now. Been involved with project management on 100 more projects probably since I've been here. Previous to that, I was also in Washington State, worked for the state for a short time. Worked alongside the SeaTac International Airport on third runway project as that grew into some city right of way, and we had to relocate roads and utilities and things like that. So good, glad to be here.
Thanks so much. And Andy?
Good morning, I think. Good afternoon. This is Andy Vallejos. I've been around for quite a bit. I can't remember when I started. That tells you how old I am, but I've worked for 2 different ADOs. I was in Texas ADO for 2 years, and then I went over to Europe for a little bit and did a lot of fun work there. Came back, and I've been with the Louisiana, New Mexico ADO for, believe it or not, going on 20 years. So been around for a long time. My passion is the outdoors and, enjoying the sun and enjoying golf, as a lot of you guys know. But my main passion, though, in the aviation industry is safety. And I can't stress that enough. I am a lead engineer. Like Roman, I'm the lead engineer for our office. So I do QC of all the important plans and specs for our large airports and some of the bigger projects at the smaller airports. But my hat that I wear all the time is safety. So I can't stress enough how safety is so important. That's what the FAA is all about. Yes, we fund a lot of projects, but safety is number one. And I also want to make a plug for our upcoming conference on day 1 at 1 o'clock. We also have plans and specifications, construction safety plan submittals. We've got an hour and 15 minutes on the upcoming conference in Hurst that we'll be talking about CSPPs and going into a lot more detail. So if we whet your appetite on this one, please come to that one, and we'll try to satiate it. But looking forward to seeing you guys at that conference coming up at the end of this month. Thank you.
Much appreciated. And myself as moderator, and you'll see the decades of experience and the cross-section of knowledge that we have for the three panelists. So without further ado, just the quickest of introductions is Construction Safety and Phasing Plan, CSPP. And it's so much more than just a plan or a single drawing. It is, of course, a package that is trying to convey the proposed intent with all angles as possible covered in the area of safety, and that things have been talked through. So we're going to get into this. This discussion is not really intended to be a 101. We're not really going to break down the initial ideas behind the development of such documents, but this is more of a, let's take it to the lessons learned phase. Let's take it to the knowledge that we've all seen in our careers so that we can embed that in the document preparation and, of course, in the field, the implementation process of when shovels are in the ground. Very important stage. So I'd love to kick it off. I will say one more time, and I'll pause throughout. Go ahead and either raise your virtual hand or type in the chat any question. We will turn our attention to it. Otherwise, we are on our way. And I'd love to address Roman first. We have a question. We're going to talk a lot about CSPP. We all know the acronym now, but I'd love to take one step to the side and say, can you, Roman, speak on the importance of a SPCD, the Safety Plan Compliance Document, when that makes an appearance and its requirements with such submissions?
Yeah, good way to start it off, Patrick. As you all know, during the CSPP process, that's handled by the consultant and the engineer of record that's creating the design. So once you get the project bid out, the CSPP has been reviewed, then obviously you're selecting the contractor. The SPCD, or as I refer to, going way old school, is a construction management plan. That's kind of how I was brought up on it, but same concept is prior to the notice to proceed given to the contractor. That's when you want to be in receipt of how the contractor is going to be in adherence to the CSPP that has already been discussed and already been vetted through FAA, LOB, the airport, and the engineer of record. You want to make sure that the contractor is aware of any unique circumstances that they may have not known prior to them bidding the project. You just want to make sure, obviously, all safety avenues are going to be adhered to. And if they have any questions, that's the perfect opportune time for them to ask prior to them getting all ramped up and getting their crews set up for flagging, getting the haul routes surveyed and make sure that everything's going to be good to go. If they're going to be crossing active areas, or if they're not, if they're going to be crossing any pavement, what potential damage they're going to be creating. Those types of issues come up there during the SPCD process, is that open communication with the contractor to make sure that they understand. That's really the bottom line of that document, and they have to provide that to you, to the airport, to the consultant, just to make sure they have a plan in place. And if there's any questions, like I said before, the most opportune time to discuss that. But also, there's nothing that says that once this document is submitted that there cannot be any amendments as the project goes on. That's kind of the living document of the overall safety at the airport. If strong proponent, and you'll hear me say that, especially those of you that work with me, is if you see something, say something. If the contractors is out there and their plan and they're going through it the first couple of days, something's not working right. There's a pause at the beginning, for the next, the next day, hey, sit down for a couple of days, whatever the schedule allows. And that's the document you'll start amending, you start fixing, correcting. That way, okay, this is the plan that's going to be taking place for our haul route. Let's say it was creating too much dust. Let's say the airport, the runway environment is still open, but it's creating dust. Hey, the watering and wetting down of the haul route is not effective. What do we need to do? So those are components that you take a look at, and most ideally, once you get those settled out, then that notice to proceed is given, and whatever is locally required for timelines of providing that contractor a notice to proceed, definitely be in adherence to that. Let's say it's a 2-week process, or however many days it is, but you give the contractor that opportunity to provide their plan and, you know, and make sure, like I said, it's a living document, you work with it, and, you know, if there's any issues, you resolve them before they become problems.
I think that's well put, and its terminology of CM plan really springboards into anyone else who wears a hat in similar industries or totally not similar industries, site development or a parking lot job. Sometimes I get asked, well, what's the difference on an airfield? And it's everything we're talking about. It's the safety component that a contractor coming along, winning the bid, has a better way of doing things. Well, that person is not just going to start initiating that better way in their mind. This is a process of documentation of one way, and they might have a better way, but we need to document that and change certain things and make sure the domino effect happens. We cannot just pivot in the field for something different that no one else has seen until that point. The FAA engagement, the airport sponsor, the engineer of record, everyone has one goal, making sure that we're on the same page. So thank you for that.
Hey, Patrick, I might add also, since this is a conversation, is that if there is a change, and I agree entirely what you guys are saying, but if there's a change at an active airport that has an air traffic control tower, that needs to be coordinated very, very closely. If there's a change that's going to affect an instrument flight procedure, you know, one of those instrument approach procedures, that needs to be coordinated closely. So, you know, if there's going to be a change, please keep the FAA in mind and just communicate with your ADO or with whoever you've got a contact with. I know most of the airports, they have contact with their air traffic control manager, and that's fine too, but don't think that you can make a change, especially with the phasing, without coming back to the reviewers and saying, hey, look,
It's a great point. And if I can move on to, again, FAA, and then I'll make your head spin a little bit, TxDOT, FAA, just keeping it fresh and making sure that we're covering all bases in this region that we're in for some great perspectives. Paul, if I could ask you a question. From the TxDOT perspective, what do you look for in a CSPP review from your office?
Well, the TxDOT project managers, the airport sponsors and consultants begin planning for safety very early in design. In the preliminary engineering report phase, we identify ingress, egress points, possible staging areas, haul routes, borrow areas, and so forth to minimize construction traffic on the airfield pavements and particularly in the operation areas. We discuss phasing options and their impacts on safety, airport operations, and budget. In the final design phase, the CSPP is delivered to TxDOT for our review prior to submission to the FAA. TxDOT project managers ensure that the checklist has been submitted with the appropriate element boxes checked off. We review the narrative and the plan sheets for accuracy and compliance with the review meeting discussions. When TxDOT is satisfied with the CSPP package, we approve it for submission to the FAA for their review and determination.
So there very much is that symbiotic relationship as TxDOT communicates closely with the FAA, and it's a great series of checks and balances, as you can tell. One thing that I'd love to tag that on, it's not so directly involved with the answer to that question, but the stakeholder engagement from all aspects. I'd like to plug here how important it can be for the airport sponsor, the airport manager, and how their responsibility is certainly intertwined with the safety on their own airfield. And engineering documents, specifications, plans, they could really be maybe not in an airport manager, so to speak, point of view or point of expertise. However, if they can definitely flip to this document, nothing is more important than this document if they were going to look at one thing in the package. And dare I say, some innovative ideas could be the engagement of the airport operations staff to take a look as well. Even the ARF, fire rescue, if there's on site, or even the city. There's a great series of stakeholder engagement that can happen during design and taking those consultant documents and making sure it gets its rounds before it even goes through the actual process that Paul just laid out. Andy, if I can go to you for your first question. Can you speak to the importance of clarity for the CSPP documents to be prepared and how the FAA reviewers are not always those with engineering backgrounds, as I just kind of pointed out, and some best practices, some tips that everyone who's submitting and communicating a CSPP can keep in mind?
Absolutely. Great question. Thank you. So I'm not going to do a 101, but I wrote down all the different guidelines we have for preparing the CSPP. Obviously, in 5370, Advisory Circular 5370-2, we've got Chapter 3 that has guidelines for preparing it. Then we have checklists in Appendix C of the same document. And then an SOP 1, which I got to give that was our first SOP, ARP SOP that we put out in 2013. It was the first because it was the most important to the FAA from a safety standpoint, was the CSPP. That's how important this is, how Roman and I have a lot of passion, and Paul, everybody here, and all the consultants have a lot of passion in it, is safety, and I can't stress that enough. But we give you a lot of guidelines on how to prepare it. And for the most part, a consultant, an engineer, myself, Roman, and I know several of you guys, all of the engineers here, we think that the audience that's going to look at this is engineering centric, right? In quotations, and they may not be. So my point is that when that CSPP comes to the FAA, the Romans and Andys of the world, we can push it forward. What we have to be cognizant of is that there are a lot of people within the FAA that are not engineer centric. They are planners, or they are air traffic controllers, some other, type of jobs. So when they see it, if we've got a bunch of confluence of information in one little area, it can be quite confusing. So my ask for anybody preparing the CSPP, KISS it, keep it simple, right? Keep your lowest denominator in mind. Think that, okay, there might be somebody that's directing traffic in the air, but has no idea as far as directing traffic on the ground. So think about that, what's going on with your project, and make it simple. One of the things that I get, and from large to small airports, if it's a single runway airport that's going to close that runway, that's simple. We all know that. That's a simple CSPP. Yes, there are certain things that need to be there, but the risk is not as high as a dual runway airport that has operations going on, or a 5 runway airport that has operations going on, right? So when you've got multiple movement areas and air traffic going on when the project's going on, that's where we've got to be extremely careful with the communication piece. So when it comes to us, and then we look at it, we do our QC, and we forward it on to the other LOBs, the expectation is that they're going to look at each sheet. And I say sheet because the document itself, and we know that there's a Bible that goes with the CSPP, right? It's a book. But what they're really looking at is going to be the plan set, the same as the contractor when he's out on the site. He's going to be looking at that plan set. We got to make sure they understand, in particular, in my opinion, the phasing of it. Roman and I are going to protect a lot. We're going to be looking for the haul routes. We're going to be looking for the danger signs and everything else. But air traffic and some of the others are going to be looking at the phasing. If the phasing is not clear on a multiple phase project, then we're not doing our jobs, and you're not going to get good replies. Of most importance is going to be when you have to have a crane up, crane down type of thing, or when you have an instrument approach procedure impact that's deleterious to the operations of the airport. We want to minimize those, right? So, but at the same time, if it's not clear, and put your mindset into that of a reviewer, if it's not clear what's going on, you're going to take worst case scenario and you're going to say, this is what's going on there. And so we may get an effect that's worse than we would like at the airport. Hopefully I'm making sense here, but I know I'm long-winded. I'll keep going. Roman, if I make a mistake, correct me, please, because this is a conversation. So what I've done a lot of times is I'll get a multiple phase project that's very complicated, and I will actually add a sheet myself, but I'm asking you guys do it, consultants, that is simply saying in phase 1, it's just one sheet. In phase 1, runway 1028 is open, but taxiway Delta, Echo, and Foxtrot is closed to traffic. Very simple, and the duration somewhere there. This duration is going to be for 45 calendar days. Phase 2, runway 1028 is closed, taxiway Alpha Charlie's closed, the rest of the airfield is open. Those kind of things in just a simple sheet for our reviewers to be able to look at it and say, aha, I see the phasing. I understand it now. I may not understand the sheet itself, but I understand the phasing. That's very helpful if you could include something like that whenever you submit a CSPP. The other side about communication is the communication of this document to your contractor when he's out in the field. once he starts looking at it, and after he's prepared the SBCD, and I've got a plug for Roman again, because that's very important, he's going to be using this document to conduct his day-to-day operations. So as you all know, 9 times out of 10, they've got this plan set on their pickup truck or whatever, and they're looking at it. What do I need to do? Make sure all the salient information is on that plan sheet. If it's communication with air traffic control, make sure that frequency is on there. You know, all the important stuff that needs to be known, make sure it's on the sheets themselves and not just in the book, because the book, it may be hard for him to find, but emergency contact information, cell phone numbers, all of that should be on the CSPP plan set, so that that contractor can quickly find it, or the RE can quickly find it and make the phone call if he needs to, if there's an emergency. So those are a couple of the best practices I've learned through the years. And I'd entertain any questions on what I just said. If anybody didn't understand what I said, I'd be happy to entertain any questions if there are any.
That's really good. I think the actual tangible insight of what you do from scratch, if it's not included in the set, is a great window into what consultants and the whole team can prepare. I envision the color codedness, the make it really shout out and clear. And you have the, well, depending on the complexity, the color coded phased areas colored, and then a duration chart saying this phase goes for this long. And in the bar chart style, something so simple, you just need to take the time to have this overall sheet before you get into the phasing, so someone's not scratching their head and really trying to digest, or dare we say, get something wrong in their interpretation.
Absolutely. Hey, Patrick, let me add one more thing. And this should have been a good question for us when we were developing questions, but I'm going to use my hands. If this is your work area, and this is a runway up here, and I'm sorry for that. If you've got 4 points of your work area, which we ask you to create a box around your work area, obviously the points closest to the runway are going to be your most deleterious. May even say, got to close the runway if we're working in that safety area, right? If your impact, when you get that back from us, is too severe for the airport, then create another box within the box. If you create another box within that box with now 4 new coordinates, we're going to give you the impact for the most deleterious point, probably closest to the runway. So I've had that over and over where they'll come back to me and say, well, I don't want to close my runway. How do I fix that? Create a box within a box. Hopefully that's understood. And then again, if you come, we'll explain that further on during the conference that's coming up on the 27th of this month. But that's another tactic to use to realize we had a project at one of our medium hubs, and they created boxes everywhere. And that allowed us and air traffic and flight procedures to look at it and say, okay, in this area, you've got this impact, in this area, you've got another. So even though it was one phase, it may have had phase 1, A, B, C, and D. And that's super fine. We don't mind. You can have 1,000 cases. It doesn't really matter. What we're trying to do is be able to do that construction as quickly as possible while keeping the airport operational as much as possible, right?
Very good additional information there. Going back to Paul with TxDOT Aviation, what issues does TxDOT Aviation in particular see in the field? That's something I'm very interested to see. Now the CSPP documentation, the whole process is done. Now things are really getting moving out in the field. What has TxDOT Aviation's experience been with some issues in the field that has arisen?
The Texas Airport System Plan includes 292 airports. 210 of those are federally funded and 82 are state funded. Approximately 174 of those airports are basic service or community service airports. So we have a lot of small rural airports. Although we try to schedule our construction to avoid the busy busy seasons and critical events, there's no perfect time for shutting down a runway or pavement on an airport. We avoid heavy traffic seasons at airports. It varies from airport to airport. That some may be hunting season, where we have a lot of business jets flying in. And others may be an agricultural airport where we have a lot of crop dusting and operations and that sort. And in that case, it could be spring. It's not a good time for us to be out there. But regardless of how much notice we give or when we break ground, we frequently have some complaints from pilots. They just don't like to be able to not use the runway. In years past, we've had reports of aircraft takeoffs or landings on closed runways or the use of taxiways as runways. And these incidents are very rare, but they can happen. And on the other hand, we may have problems with construction vehicles crossing active runways. In the design phase, we can see our geotechs or surveyors getting out on an active runway, doing their surveying or bores without proper NOTAMs or their closed runway markings. Airport sponsors and engineering consultants communicate with tenants throughout the design and bid phases in an effort to minimize incidents in the construction phase. But the communication with shareholders is vital through design and construction phases. We just try to coordinate with everyone and make sure that we're breaking ground, we're closing runways at the right time, that the tenants are aware of our schedule and agreed to it to whatever degree that we can allow that to happen. But so communication is just really vital for the safety out there.
And that's going to be a theme, if it hasn't been already, for this panel. And certain things come to mind, as of course we want to protect the names, to protect the innocent of any incidents that have happened on an airfield. But the theme here is head on a swivel, because even though someone signed on the dotted line, they totally understand and they absorb the safety plan that's in place and the phasing. Well, is there a second-tier subcontractor coming into the airfield that day? All the way down to the tiers of the operational staff or maintenance staff of the airport, were they totally plugged in? So it's just everyone's responsibility, even though everyone reviewed and is on the same page. Anything can happen on any given day on that field, and all tied to the very importance of notice to airmen, NOTAMs, of course, for the pilots, and protecting that runway, whether it is active or closed. So some great points there.
Hey, Patrick, let me interject also something you said that's very important. At a lot of our smaller airports or our rural, very remote airports, we may have a project once every 10 years. So when that project does happen, it may be a contractor that either has never worked on an airport or this is the very first time. That should all be considered by the airport sponsor. What is the experience of that contractor to ensure that they have adequate RPRs and QC for that project. But that's where we run into a lot of problems, is when we get a contractor first time ever working on the airport, both from an engineering standpoint and a safety standpoint. So that could be a problem for the rural areas for sure.
It does happen. Yeah, thank you for that. Roman, back to you. Can you speak on the importance of communication among the airport, consultant, contractor, et cetera, and how to mitigate discrepancies you have seen, such as examples like the haul route or other aspects differing from the submitted OEAA and the construction documents? So how important communication is when you're starting to see these discrepancies.
Yeah, that's a good one. It kind of ties in a little bit to the overall communication flow is, with the like I was speaking already on the SPCDs, but one, I'm going to bring out an example that I have, the firsthand experience that took place when I was working out at Denver ADO. We went out to a airport doing a project out in Utah, and we went to the construction site. Everything was going, and everything. CSPP was approved. The management plan from the contractor was approved. Everything was set in place, and here we are. The project's going, and the runway was closed. But yet here comes a pilot coming in, flies into the airport, lands. We weren't doing work on the runway. We were in the safety areas, and sure enough, the pilot lands, and not a local pilot, transient. Didn't check the NOTAMs, so we shut down operations. And a huge lesson learned there on the communication flow overall with all entities working in the airport environment. You have a situation where the local users of the airport, being, the contractor, the airport manager, the engineer of record, they know what the project is. But in addition to that is communicating that to the users of the airport, your tenants, making sure that they understand that, runway 1836 is going to be closed from this time to this time on these set days to be, to have work performed. I'm talking, the non-towered side of the house from this example, but it is clearly evident that as part of that process is to communicate to all those who intend to use the airport at any given time. That example, luckily, fortunately, no lives were lost, no damage to any aircraft or, anybody on the ground. So, we definitely, got away with one there, but it definitely brought over as a lesson learned on my part is not in addition to having the CSPPs in place and having all the plans in place is like, hey, what are you doing as an airport to communicate that to the external user? Are your NOTAMs updated? Obviously, the NOTAM process differs from a towered airport to a non-towered airport. You have airport managers. If they're not familiar with that process, hey, how do you go about it? These are obviously will be brought up. Hopefully, questions that are being brought up during that CSPP process. But in addition, also something may happen during the construction that was not covered in the at the preliminary stages. That hey, I need to communicate that information out there. Andy can attest, Paul can attest, communicate. If you have an issue that you foresee happening, obviously, if you're a towered airport and there's something that has to be coordinated, like Andy said, is like, hey, we need to issue a NOTAM because in 2 or 3 days, we're going to have, unexpectedly, we have to bring a crane in, brings up a lot of other processes and so on and so forth. But the sooner you get to that issue or to that you see down the road, the sooner you can get to a point where you can try to resolve those potentials for anything going against the review process in OEAAA. When you submit your CSPP plan and it gets looked by other FAA lines of businesses, and going back to those comments, if there's something that's not clear, there's something that, hey, on that particular phase, let's say phase 5 of a 8-phase project, hey, you know what, we missed something and you're in phase 3, hey, bring it up. That way you have time to communicate that. But that example that I gave from that, it was a small GA airport, but that definitely brought the importance at very early in my career of safety, seeing at firsthand of what could go wrong if things were not in place. A simple thing is having equipment flagged as they're operating, even in a closed environment. That's a different perspective. I'm not a pilot myself, but those of you that are, I'm sure the world looks completely different from the air, than being on the ground. And if there's a reason why we have those flags on put on vehicle, obviously be in good condition and so on and so forth. But communicate any potential issues, making sure all the users put out the word as best you can to ensure that, if you have a closed environment, that there's not going to be an aircraft coming in and not know what's going on. Having somebody on, a lot of minute details associated with it, but at the same time, bottom line, communicate.
Absolutely. And that's one of the more drastic things that we're definitely front of mind trying to mitigate our aircraft landing when they certainly shouldn't, or they should be aware of what's going on. Then there's the airport tenants. Maybe they're just coming out of their hangar, business as usual, not really knowing. We have these ancillary people and human factors to take into consideration. And then on the ground level, say, especially for a non-towered, smaller GA airport, as an example, is the contractor blocking that gate, that access gate, and that's the access for emergency vehicles to come in. God forbid something's happening on the field. So all aspects, everybody just having eyes out for everything. The plan is not all inclusive. There is a human factor and there's a day-to-day, anything can happen.
Yeah. And it varies from the size of airport. I mean, it's not a, one size fits all type approach. You got each individual, we have the baseline. The advisory circular gives you a checklist of how, or, the minimum requirements really, but there's nothing that says that you can't go above and beyond on your safety requirements to operate there at the airport. Because each situation is different. You get a large hub airport, very, very busy. A lot of entities that you have to coordinate with, and then you have a small basic airport, a GA airport, minimal activity in comparison. but you have a different dynamic. So the airport you're operating on definitely is going to set the tone as to, how you're going to view the safety approach to it.
Very good. And I'm anxious to take the next level of this discussion. It was one of the prepared questions for Andy, and just continuing this into the importance of a runway being closed, the redundancy that is absolutely needed, pros and cons to the elements of said redundancy of communication, not verbally, but in the other ways of communication, what that plan, what that document, and what the aspects on site are trying to portray to whom, if you can speak on that.
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. So just to make sure everybody's aware, because I have had airports of all sizes ask this question, there are actually two NOTAMs that may affect your airport at any one time. There's going to be your FDC NOTAM, which is your Instrument Approach Procedure NOTAM. And then there's going to be your D NOTAM. Most of you guys know that, but most of you here hopefully know that. But that's very important. It's not a redundancy necessarily, but it is. And it's very important that if you need both, that you enact both. The D NOTAMs are pretty simple. You're aware of how to enact those. The FDC NOTAMs were a little bit more difficult, but now in our determination letter, we put in there how to answer that, how to say the crane's up, crane's down. So that should have been solved. If, though, you get a determination letter and it does not tell you how to issue the FDC NOTAM, please reach out to whoever wrote that determination and ask them, hey, I didn't get the notification as far as issuing a NOTAM, but it says on there my instrument approach procedures are affected. So we need to ensure that those happen. What I wanted to share with you, the redundancy factor that I like, and if I'm your reviewer, I may ask for a little bit more redundancy on the airfield, is going to be your lighted X and your cloth X or your plywood X, whatever you want to call it on the airfield. I've had experience where lighted X was hit by an aircraft. Same kind of situation Roman's talking about. The runway was closed. The aircraft came in. He ran into it. Luckily, there was no loss of life, but he hit that lighted X. We found out later it was a bright sunny day. There was a big lake behind the airport, so there's a huge glare. He did not see that X. He did not see the lights on the X, and he hit it. So the redundancy of having both the cloth X and the lighted X, to me, if I was an airport owner, I would do it for every single project I have. Now, do you need the lighted X for every project? Our AC says not necessarily. It's preferred method, but it's not absolutely necessary. But if I had my druthers and you have the money within your, the funding within your project, I would recommend you use both. And again, and I think most of you guys that are pilots realize you can't see that lighted X until you make your final, right? So if you're coming down the down leg and you're a pilot, you may not see it, but you'll see that cloth X. At nighttime, if you're in a sea of lights, the lighted X is absolutely mandatory. And you can see that in 5370-2. Gotta have it. If you're at I hate to throw up DFW, but they're right next door, right? But if you're at a DFW and you're closing a piece of pavement, a runway, and you've got everything else open around it, and you got the lights on at night, that you have to have that lighted X, there's no doubt. But my redundancy would be lighted and cloth X at a lot of airports, maybe not the smallest. The smallest of small airports, perhaps cloth is good. But just like Roman said, if you don't have adequate NOTAMs in place, if you don't have publications in your FBO saying on these dates, it's going to be closed. So tell your itinerant customers, don't come. I mean, that's simple, right? You've got some a junket coming in for the casino that day that was scheduled. You tell them, look, we're not open. Go to another airport, nearby airport. I mean, that behooves that everybody at that airport, whether it's the FBO, whether it's airport management, that they do that communication piece. It behooves them to do that because they keep their customers happy. The last thing they want to do is have that junket arrive and he's on final and he realizes, oh, the runway's closed and he has to go to another airport, so that they can make their plans, reach out to those people and do that. That may not be the audience here, but you guys can advise the airports, hey, this is good communication. Give them a sheet of paper and say, on these dates, the runway's going to be closed. Have it right there in front of them. Not the big plan sheet, because they may not be able to understand it, but at least some communication. Tell them, hey, look, the redundancy is we're going to be closing this runway and we'd like your customers to know it. That's good practice. And I don't want to take up all the time. So that's all I've got for now, Patrick.
and I just keep tagging on the great points. And I love the specific nature of the X's, and just what doesn't always come front of mind is the lighted X and how the electrical system just needs to be in tune and absolutely critical. It's a no-brainer when you say it like that, but it's just that the point of redundancy is also that lighted X has its flowing electricity to power it at all times. And that is just a series of checks and balances that is so critical. The other thing that is embedded in a lot of what we've already discussed is also inexperienced pilots. You know, depending on the size of your airport, do you have pilots who are freshly made pilots? Are they trainees? Are they just doing their touchdowns? So things of that nature. Again, it's just all the variables so that we are doing what we can to put plans in place for mitigation. And we have some questions coming in through the chat. So my panelists, if you are able to open the chat, I'll read it, but if you can read along. And it's perfect timing to go into the 15 minutes or so that I wanted to allocate for questions. So I can start with the first one, and then we'll have a free-for-all as to who can answer first. Is there a standard way the FAA wants to see CSPP submitted through OE-AAA when there are multiple phases, subphases? Is it supposed to be one submission showing all phases, or separate OE-AAA submission for each phase?
I'm going to give an opinion now, but I want to hear Roman's too, because we're in different offices. In my opinion, it should all be submitted together as one project, but then each work area and each phase should have its own separate borders, right? And its own separate points. And then in the description, you know, make sure you put that in there. And the reason for that, primarily for your controlled facilities that have air traffic control, they know they're going to be moving traffic a different way for each phase. So they need to see the big picture. And the communication I like to see is one page that has all the phases on it, and then separate pages with each individual phase so they can study each condition separately. That also goes into SRM, which at the end, give me 2 minutes, Patrick, because I want to talk about SRM, but I don't want to take time from questions just in case. Roman?
No, I agree. It's you know, when you submit that CSPP, we want to take a look at it from a individual phase, but the whole document as a whole, to make sure that the flow works from our perspective is a reasonable flow, right? You know, and depending on the type of airport, it definitely gives us also, it gives us the opportunity for, if you're a 139 airport or not a 139 airport, is it gives our coordination a little bit, it's a one-stop shop versus trying to pull up multiple cases to review one CSPP. It definitely makes life a lot easier, not just for you, but for us as well, to review one document or go to one location and review one document that has multiple phases versus trying to open up multiple cases that has a particular phase. But keep, you know, it tying in and keep in mind too is that, you know, keep it simple aspect of it is depending on, you know, what type of airport you are. Again, I bring out the 139 and non-139 is the level of coordination on a 139 airport is a little bit more extensive because your cert inspector is going to make sure that whatever is going to be closed, you know, the operational aspect of the airports are going to be in place. On a non-139 airport, you have a little bit more leeway on, you know, what's closed and duration and so on and so forth. But definitely, I echo what Andy says in terms of the one, you know, submittal for an OE-AAA case, and just make sure that it's clearly delineated as to which phases, you know, when you submit your sheets, you can submit an overall sheet and you can submit individual phase sheets associated with that case. That way we take a look at the big picture and then individual components of it.
Really good. And another question that was in the chat, and then we'll circle back. Andy, you wanted 2 minutes for another topic. Does anyone have a best management practice for quickly addressing cranes taller than their associated airspace evaluations? So a BMP for when that elevation difference is happening with a crane out on site.
Yeah, I can speak directly from experience. And each EDO is set up differently. Each individual POC for your ADO with your respective airport is going to be a little bit different. But for my example is, I'm the POC for the Houston airport system. So we deal with a lot of cranes in particular at IH and at Hobby. What helps us is I have a standing meeting with their, you know, HAS's local airspace guru. And we have a conversation every couple of weeks and we talk about this. So anytime an unexpected event comes that, hey, we need to address a higher crane height. Obviously, the original determination that we do mark that box, should that height exceed what was evaluated, you need to coordinate. And a lot of times we get in contact with the local FAA folks. They get in communication with me. I get in communication with our Part 139, and it's an ad hoc conversation that needs to take place. A lot of these issues can be resolved locally, but it involves if you walk away from this conversation is, communication, catch it up front. And that's how we handle a lot of the HAS issues with cranes, because a lot of them are short fused. And short of going through the whole OE AAA process for a brand new case, which you all know we're allowed X amount of time, that might not have the contractor there in place. Well, I'm going to have to move my crane, out somewhere else to another job site or whatever the case may be, and delays and so on and so forth. But if you can start it there locally with the local FAA folks, the tower folks, and get in contact with your respective ADO, POC, and start working the issue. And ultimately, the determination is going to come back whether one of two things: you can resolve it locally, or you will have to submit a new case.
And I might add that exactly what Roman says, but if you don't have that set up, you're going to want to type up a real quick email that has all the details. When is he coming? What's his AGL? What's his, AMSL, all that stuff. Do it in an email, send it to your point of contact at the ADO. Like Roman says, it's different for every ADO. Apologize for that. It'd be great if it was one person. But anyway, send it to whoever that respective contact is, and then follow on with a phone call. Don't assume that email got to him or her. So follow on with a phone call and say, hey, I sent you an email. It's a rush. The crane's going to be here tomorrow. We had to go 50 foot higher. What do we do? And then put that on the ADO. We have had instances where we cannot react quickly enough. We can't get hold of the people that need to review this quick change. And in that case, we go back to the airport and we say, you know what? The best practice is, if you got to have it, close your runway. And if it's a single runway operation, close your runway, issue a NOTAM, and do it. And you have every authority to do that. And that's worst case. But best case is to get us, like Roman says, get us the information, let us noodle on it and see if we can adjust, and then get you. Now the best practice is do not take anything verbal. Make sure you get it in writing, our answer in writing, because you want to have us on the hook, right? But don't take a verbal from us. Make sure we send you a written email saying this is the effect, and you're good to go.
I really like the very specific nature of that Q&A there. So that's great. And those were two questions that came in the chat. I'd love to pause here. 9 or so minutes left in the hour. And anyone can feel free to unmute their phones and ask a question verbally, or type another one in the chat. Otherwise, we can have one more or two piece of discussion and then slowly adjourn. But again, let me pause for just a few seconds. Does anyone from the audience have a question they'd like to virtually raise their hand on? Feel free to jump in at any time as we're winding down. But Andy, you want to speak on one more topic?
Sure. So timing of the CSPP submittal, and I think Paul talked about this, that it's usually at the end. It usually is at the end. Is that best practice at BMP? No. So as soon as you know how you're going to construct that project and how you're going to phase it, I recommend you submit it, especially for our medium and large hub airports, because of that little thing that we have in the FAA called safety risk management, right? We haven't pushed that out to the field yet, and it's coming, and we've got an NPRM out for that. But in our SRM for the Office of Airports, if there's an issue with that phasing and any of the LOBs, flight procedures or air traffic says we need to have a panel, that can really delay your project. So we recommend, as soon as you know how you're going to construct that project, submit the CSPP. That's number one. Number two, like Roman alluded to, it can take 30 to 60 days to 90 days to 120 days for us to answer that CSPP. Depending on, again, we have to wait for all the other LOBs to answer it. We have to wait for a 139 inspector, if it's a 139 airport, to answer it. So we're looking for a lot of answers to that. So that's another reason to do it early. And why? Because that document is part of your contractual, that's a part of the contract that's going to go out to be bid. If it's onerous, yes, we're going to get higher bids. We get it. But, we understand that there's certain things we need to do. That's one more point I want to bring up. If you speak with your local air traffic control tower and they say, you need to build me a temporary runway, don't take that for fact. Get back with the FAA and say, look, they wanted to build a temporary runway for this project at this GA airport. Let us know. Don't just submit that in the CSPP. We're going to build a temporary runway. That's a little bit ludicrous for some of these low funded projects, right? So if you do get information like that, that sounds a little bit out of whack, get with your FAA program manager, discuss it with him or her, and just give them a chance to opine on it before you put it in the CSPP. It would be really good, for us to see that before it actually gets down on paper. Thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of something similar to there too is the, I hate to throw the money aspect of it, but obviously requirements for, all projects that are funded with AIP funding. And I'm talking, I know right now we have multiple pots of money, but those are all included as part of this process. Now, if you have a project that's not AIP funded nor state funded, and it's like your own local funds, definitely strong recommendation, underlying exclamation points is adhere to our CSPP process for any project taking place on your airport. Everything that we talked about today, implement those actions, even if it's not being funded from a federal or state perspective. If it's local funds, still follow our procedures. Just, it's good practice, good frame of mind to get into.
That's great. And I'll start winding down the discussion here with hopefully what everyone took away from this is the accessibility and the willingness to have discussions and reviews and the keep it simple approach from our panelists. I'd love to thank Paul Slusser from TxDOT Aviation for the time and effort going into the preparation of this and the time herein. Also Roman and Andy from the FAA perspective. And the teaser for those two is that don't miss in Hurst, Texas, just less than 2 weeks away. Come on down for their follow-up panel and come with some hard-hitting questions, please. With that, I'd love to turn it back over to Frank to wind down the presentation.
Panelists, great job. Andy, Roman, Paul. Patrick, thank you to you and Urban Engineers for sponsoring the event today and doing a great job moderating our panel. Thanks for the hub about the partnership conference in Hurst. And again, tomorrow you have an opportunity to take advantage of another South Central chapter event, and that is the General Aviation Airports Committee. It's going to be about regulatory updates from the national CCCAAAE, and I hear there's going to be some updates about funding. So you might want to log into that, go to our website, register just like you did for today. The last thing I want to close this with is we have a lot of our consultants and contractors on the phone and material suppliers on the phone or on the call. Contact me if you would like to be like Patrick and Urban Engineers and sponsor one of these monthly events for the rest of the year. So thank you for your time. Again, gentlemen, great job. I look forward to seeing all of